So by now, I hope you've heard the good news. The latest edition of Mindful Landlord, so Mindful Landlord second edition, is out. And, I wanted to just let you know why I wrote this book a little bit. And part of it is that I feel like there are some ideas in terms of how you optimize mental performance that really help people, or they've helped me on my real estate journey. And part of what I wanted to do with the book is to really share some of the methodology behind optimizing your mind to be successful in real estate. And then, of course, a more down-to-earth approach of how to run rental property for profit and peace of mind, not to fall into the trap of more doors, more dollars, more deals. So if you want to check out the book, this is really the best thing and the closest way you can have to having Terrie in your corner when you make your real estate decisions.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Real Estate Investors Club podcast. I'm here today with Derek Dombeck. Dombeck is a longtime investor. He's been in the game for quite a while, which I just looked up in his bio. And he is also the founder of a private lending company. The name of your private lending company?
Best REI Funding.
Thank you. And so, Derek, maybe to start out, you can just tell us a little bit about your journey that has led you to be sitting in this seat talking with me today.
Well, I'll give you the shorter version of the last 18 years, but I started off like many people do. I had a construction background, so I didn't go on to any formal college or business class or schools. I learned School of Hard Knocks, learned as I go, and 2003 was when my wife Tracy and I had gotten into our first real estate investments, and it started off really kind of quick. I don't usually overanalyze anyways. So when something interesting happens, I'm pretty fast to act. So we had, within the first month in business, we did 4 deals. The first couple were fixer-upper rental properties. I happen to live in Wisconsin. And the other 2 deals I did were in the state of Florida. I had met some people, down there, and we entered into some contracts to build some new construction spec homes in Florida while we were fixing up these older properties close to home. And over the next few years, from 2003 through about 2006, we had built up a portfolio is worth about $4 million. So what is that in Canadian, like $50? And
No, it's like 10 million.
Okay. I might have gone the wrong way on that. Yeah. Damn conversion rates. Who can keep track? But
we do. Trust me.
It didn't take a lot to convert what happened in Canadian dollars or US dollars, because in 2007 it all went bye-bye. The markets crashed. I thought that everything we'd done was safe. I thought that everything we'd done had lots of equity and margin, and I was so wrong. And I think you and I talked a little bit before the show, and I was interviewed on a different podcast this week with a Canadian host, and it sounds like your markets are starting to have some turmoil, we'll call it.
Yeah.
And I lived that, but back then I didn't have a network. It was my biggest mistake in real estate. It was being a closet investor, not telling everybody what I really could do or wanted to do, or shout it from the rooftops. Instead, I was kind of just picking away. I'd buy a couple properties, and if I ever mentioned it to friends or family, they were always like, well, Derek, be careful, we don't want something bad to happen, which is terrible advice, because they were not business owners. Nobody in my friends or circle of friends in my family had ever owned a business. So for them to give you business advice is really them just looking in a mirror saying, well, if Derek succeeds, then it's going to make us look worse, right? Because we didn't succeed. And a lot of people, especially as they just get started in real estate, I think have that same battle. But my struggle then was the internal struggle of my failure. My wife and I, we used banks for everything back then. We had good jobs. We had good credit. We had banks that were throwing money at us saying, here you go ahead and buy and buy and buy. And we found out that by using banks only, we had zero control over our business. And when, not if, but when the markets shift, because it always happens, we all run in cycles, doesn't matter what country we're from. We weren't prepared for that cycle. And I remember somebody had told me, when the pizza delivery boy is building a spec home in Florida, it's probably time to get out. And they literally were pizza delivery men and boys and women and girls, whatever, that could go to a bank or a mortgage broker in the United States and borrow money to build a $300,000, $400,000 property. That was bad. But it was too late for us. We didn't realize it soon enough. So on the personal side, which I don't always get into, but I'm okay with talking about it, at the same time, my wife and I were trying to grow a family, and we realized we couldn't have kids naturally. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people in real estate don't really want to admit that, their personal life and their business life are intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going through something personally, your business could be going very well and then it falters, or vice versa. Right. So for us we had our first child, which was a medical procedure and, in vitro fertilization. And that was in 2006. So things were still going good. But as we went through 2007 and 8 and 9 and trying to come up with a lot of money, these, things are expensive, in a time when there wasn't a bank in the United States that would lend us a nickel, because it just, credit was shot, right? Portfolio was done. Net worth was in the toilet. So we had about a $4 million portfolio that went to about $1 million in value in about a 6 to 12 month period, we'll call it, right? So what I didn't realize at that time, Terrie, was that was the biggest blessing I've ever received in my life, was losing damn near everything. Financially, it forced us to either quit or learn a better way, learn how to be creative, learn how to structure deals, learn how to talk to people. And that is what I think almost everybody's biggest mistake is, we all want to go out and do deals. We all want to make big money. Most of us don't take the time to learn how to talk to people. And this is a people business. So I learned it by force. As the banks were foreclosing, taking my properties away, we had to do what we could to work with them. But then we also had to go and still buy houses. And what I found was being honest was something that wasn't happening a lot in the late 2000s when the markets were crashing. Everybody was trying to blame everybody else. So there were lawsuits going on like crazy. Everybody was blaming the banking industry, appraisals or appraisers, closing attorneys, title companies, all these different, everybody but themselves. Like nobody wanted to look in the mirror and say, I screwed up. And I remember going into a bank who was a local bank and had funded a lot of my local transactions, and they were still willing to work with me. But I sat down with the president of the bank and my commercial loan officer, and I had mapped out a plan on how we were going to get through what we were going through. And ultimately, they were still willing to work with me. I had to find a partner that had a credit score that could support the loans. But they knew it was me, my experience, and was what they were still willing to work with. But the challenge with that, Terrie, is it was still using banks. And I didn't really know any better until about 2010, 2011. I really started studying the alternative methods of buying property. or controlling property. So here in the US, we like to use options. We, can control property with leases. We can buy property with the existing financing staying in place. And just what we call master leasing, go and leasing a property and subleasing it to another tenant without ever owning it. Another way to do things with very little money, right? So I started learning all that, but I also started embracing building a network across the country. So I didn't stay just in my own backyard or my own little town. And through that, I met my current business partner, and his name is Jeff. Jeff had never used a bank for any real estate transaction he'd ever done. He was always raising private money, and it actually to a point where he was lending some money as well, because he had enough lender or enough private money where he couldn't keep their money busy. So he would do a couple loans here and there. And that's what we did together. We ramped up the number of primarily residential houses that we were buying, fixing up, reselling. Some we would hold and rent out. But we got really good at raising money, and we didn't want our investors to go somewhere else. So we started this arbitrage business. We typically pay our investors 9% for the use of their money. We lend it out at 12, and in some cases 13%. So we make a spread.
Mm-hmm.
And that has grown into what is today several $1 million a month in loans. And in average month can be 20, 25 loans. All just honestly done by a former construction worker, and my business partner is a self-proclaimed nerd who was in the IT profession. So anybody can do what we've done. It really, I would go back to learning how to talk to people first and foremost, and then just never quit. So that's the short version, Terrie.
Okay. Well, there's like a few really like interesting things that I want you to tell us more about. So just help me understand. So like, the US real estate situation starts to tank, and the stuff is like slowly going down the drain or quickly going down the drain. And then how exactly does that downward spiral happen? Because I mean, let's say you have tenants in place, and if I understand that you did rental properties, like will the bank call the loan because you're underwater on it, or like did the tenants stop paying? And then what did that look like on the way down?
So back then it was a little different than now, because there are some different banking regulations that were put in place because of what happened. But back then, many of these loans were being written at or above the actual value of the real estate.
Right.
And then the loans were just bundled up and sold off to, hedge funds and sold off to Wall Street.
Yeah.
Okay. So once it was discovered that basically this paper, these loans had nothing backing them of real value, that was the beginning of the spiral. It started to escalate very quickly, because the people that couldn't sell them then decided, okay, we have to get some kind of income coming in. We built this house for, some of the numbers on houses I had built in Florida were $300,000 at that time, and that house would have rented for $1,500, which is not going to pay for it, but it cuts the bleeding, right? Or it stops the bleeding. So you've got just a whole subdivision. Just picture 1,000 houses in a subdivision, and 1,000 of them can't be sold at once. So 500 of them are going to now try and get tenants. And the tenants that were in an existing house, they may have been, paying, I don't know, $1,500 for an existing house that was 10 or 20 years old, can now move into a brand new house that's never been lived in, that's twice as big as what they have, for $1,000. So they're leaving and they're walking away from their leases, even though they have, contractual obligations to pay the lease. Their response was, sue me. I don't care. I'm going to go live in this really nice house. The joke was on them because that really nice house lasted for about 6 to 12 months and then it got foreclosed and they were kicked out. But the tenants were just jumping from property to property and driving rents down because oversupply. So from that point on, it was just people pointing fingers at each other. Like I mentioned earlier, the lawsuits that happened were crazy. And ultimately, was there blame? Yeah, of course, there was things that were done wrong. But the thing that our government got out of it was, we're going to blame the banks because of the zero down loans that they were issuing. So you look at today's market, and about 2 to 3 years ago, the only way that anyone could get a zero down loan or a very low down payment loan was if you went through a government backed or a government insured loan program. So the government put these stipulations in place preventing the private banks from doing exactly what they are now doing. And the same thing is going to happen again because people have overpaid for houses for the last 2 years for sure, and have gotten into them with these government insured loans with 0 to 3.5% down payments. And if they have to move for any reason in the next 5 to 10 years, these houses are underwater. They're not going to sell for what they just paid for them. And they can't afford to, unless they have cash, which they don't, to, pay off the remainder balance of the loan over and above what the house will sell for. We're going to see an increase in foreclosures again. I don't think it's going to be to the degree in the United States of what it was in 2007, 8, and 9, but it's definitely going to happen.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. And so like, if we just get back to sort of like the personal angle on this, because, if we want to try to give our listeners something, it's like what allows people to go through tough times. And, you're not the first American investor who says that period was really a blessing in disguise for them. So first of all, tell me what helped you mentally get through it. And then how do you turn a catastrophe into a blessing?
I drank and drank and drank a lot of alcohol. So I got through it that way. But seriously, I was brought up by my father, who passed away during all that crap, which was just another kick in the head. But, he raised me to never quit. He raised me to finish what you start. And I think it was his passing away from cancer at age 64 that opened my eyes to, I don't want to let him down. He's in the grave, but I don't want to let him down. And if I quit on myself, I'm quitting on everything he taught me. And I'm blessed to have a loving wife who, was at my side. Plenty of excuses to blame each other, which we tried not to, right? But there's all these things that a young family. I mean, at that time, we had our first daughter, and then we adopted our son from China. And, we've got these 2 little babies, their mouths to feed. And I don't know what it is when you get pushed back up against the wall. You either curl up and die or you come out swinging. And I just come out swinging.
And I mean, I like the comment before that you made also about the fact that when faced with some kind of a challenge like that, you're forced to find, if you decide and you make it, right, you're forced to find a different way of doing things. Because I think what happens is, like, we crash the car, and like whatever behavior we have, and like I'm turning this into a bigger thing, but like it works in the real estate context as well. Like it works in the rest of life. It's like you have a certain set of behaviors and a certain set of things, and they've taken you to wherever you are. And then at some point you hit a ceiling, or life throws something at you, and what you have isn't enough. And then you have to kind of say, okay, let me deal with some of the things that have been holding me back. And I mean, I think you hinted for you that it was kind of a network problem, but like, what's the thought process that allows you to be like, I'm going to now address whatever deficiency I have in order to build back stronger. Because it's not just coming out swinging, right? Like it's thinking like, what can I do? What skills do I need to acquire to get myself out of this trouble? You know?
Well, the beautiful thing is, Terrie, once you've lived it and you've gone through the downturns and the catastrophes, as long as you don't have brain damage, you don't lose what's up here, right? So everyone else that's starting to panic with our American interest rates increasing, I know your interest rates have increased significantly, you know, they're all starting to panic. To me, I'm looking at, I mean, I am so damn excited about the opportunities that are presenting themselves already and what's going to present itself, because I've seen the end of the movie. I know what moves to make now that I had no way of knowing back then. And that's the blessing. To build back bigger and stronger for me, I used what Tracy and I went through to help people. So I would sit down with homeowners that were going through the same problems, and I could sit across the kitchen table, look at them eyeball to eyeball, and tell them, I know exactly how you feel. Here's how I know how you feel, and here's how I'm going to help you get through it. And that's how we built our business back up, just by being real with people. And, you know, I say it often enough where people that know me are probably sick of hearing it, but we're real estate problem solvers. If we solve enough of people's real estate problems, we'll make a nice profit and we'll be able to support our families. If we're out there trying to take advantage of people's misfortunes, we're going to make short-term money, but long-term, we're probably going to fail. We're going to have a terrible reputation. And, you know, I want to be able to sleep at night and know that I did right by people.
I love that. I think you're absolutely right. I think that, you know, and I know it's weird because I feel like people don't say that enough, you know, like that like authenticity and honesty and like just being upfront with people and being real. It doesn't get enough good press.
Yeah, I'm blunt to a fault. Sometimes my wife tells me I'm a little too blunt, but I don't believe in wasting people's time. And maybe they don't always like what comes out of my mouth, but they're going to know where I stand. I don't hold back.
So let's switch the conversation a little bit. So I know you got some other projects going on aside from, you know, the private lending and the investing that you still do. I think you mentioned that you have a couple of books in the works. You run a conference. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit about some of those things and, you know, what are the messages behind them? And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I mentioned before that we really focused on building a network. So we started going to other conferences and events and being intentional about meeting people and then staying in touch with people. So we had gone on this cruise, this real estate investors cruise, for 7 of its 8 years. And after about year 5, we had grown very close to a number of people. So we decided to rent a nice fancy house somewhere twice a year. And there was about 17 or 18 of us, and we all stay in a house together, and it's a round table mastermind, and we just help each other with our businesses. After we had done this for a little while, other people started to ask us, well, how do we become a part of that? And the answer was, you can't, because it's an invitation only and the group is full. So that led to us starting another group, which led to another group. So we currently have 3 national, you know, people from all over the United States in these mastermind groups, and each group meets twice a year at a different location. And what we think is the secret sauce is the fact that when you stay in a house together for 4 or 5 days, you know, you wake up in the morning and it might just be over coffee, or it might be in the evening, you know, sitting around a hot tub or swimming pool or playing poker until midnight or whatever it is. But you're bonding and you're having conversations outside of when we're actually in our session. Our mastermind session is really from 9 until 5 each day, but it's those side conversations, and it's that caring that really comes out of it, where each group is such a tight-knit family now. it'd be pretty hard to break them up.
Mm-hmm.
So we were doing that. It's called the Circle of Trust. And from that conference we'd been going on for years, the people that hosted it, we became very close with. They're mentors of mine. I'm honored to call them, very close friends today. They asked us to take that conference over because of their age and their health, and it was time. So that also happened to be the year of COVID, which I think you guys are in your third year of COVID now up there.
No, it's done. It's done. Well,
no,
who is Terrie to decide? I decided it was done 2 years ago.
It's flaring back up in Canada. So it was challenging. We ended up having to cancel that event that year, and but it's called the Generations of Wealth, and we call it that because that generation, passed it off to us, passed off their knowledge to us, and it's designed to where we bring in about 10 to 12 speakers. It's a 5-day event, and we have this is for advanced real estate strategies and networking. I mean, that's the focus. So our speakers speak from 9 a.m. until 1 in the afternoon. And then the whole afternoon through dinner is designed to be, you go off and network, get to know the people that are there, really spend time with each other. And then we have these town hall sessions in the evening that are optional, but it's more interactive. We might have a topic with some case studies or something that everybody's kind of working on together. And the thing that I really love about it, Terrie, is I and my wife, our staff, we encourage people to bring their children, specifically if they're 10 and older. And we don't charge them any extra. Their kids can sit in on the conference. And it's not so that they learn these advanced strategies, because they're not going to understand most of it anyways. Hell, most adults don't understand it, right? But what it's doing is the kids of the entrepreneurs are getting to meet other kids of other entrepreneurs, and they're building a network in their preteen and teen years that we didn't build until we were in our 30s, 40s, 50s, some of us, right? My soon to be 16-year-old daughter, actually, she put on a presentation at our last conference, which made me tear up a little bit, which was titled "How to Get Your Kids Involved in Your Business." But she has a network of friends from 6 different states at this point. They actually, they stay in touch on social media, of course, but they actually handwrite letters to each other, which is amazing. I never thought any kid would ever do that again. And she's almost 16, and she's got such a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of connections that she can do anything she wants. And my other 2 kids are following right behind. So Generations of Wealth, it's going to be in Cancun, Mexico in February of 2023. We marketing it currently. I mean, it's Generations of Wealth. The website is gowvoyage.com. Love to have some Canadians there. That would be fantastic. Terrie, you should come. But so I'm really proud of that. You mentioned a couple books. I had never expected to be an author. And earlier this year, I met a very incredible man whose business partner was Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn was a pretty famous author and speaker.
Yeah.
So Jim Rohn's business partner, Kyle Wilson, asked me to co-author a book that he's publishing. And shortly thereafter, after I said yes to that, I met a ghostwriter. And this ghostwriter said, "Well, why don't you write your own book? I'll ghostwrite it for you, but let's do that." So I went from no author experience to currently working on 2 of them. And I'd love to give them away to your listeners for free, the electronic version. They won't be published until hopefully the end of November, first week of December. That's the goal on both of them. So anybody can just shoot me an email to my personal email address, which is my first name, Derek, DEREK, at bestreifunding.com. Tell me you heard me on Terrie's podcast, and I'll throw you on the list as soon as they're published. Free of charge. I'll send both of them to you.
Thank you. That's very generous. We're going to get all that good stuff and put it in the show notes. So we're kind of coming to the end of the time that we have. Is there any sort of golden nugget or any piece of information that you want to transmit to our audience before we tell them what the best way is to reach you?
If you guys are starting to go through a downturn, I would focus heavily on finding your private capital sources and learning how to buy Canadian real estate with alternative methods. I've never bought anything in Canada, so I don't know how many of these different strategies that I do here would correlate across. Interestingly enough, the other podcast I was on this week with the gentleman from Ottawa, he started telling me about your bank financing for a typical homeowner. And from what he described, you don't get fixed rate financing for long periods of time. Does that sound about right?
5 year. It's typically the longest you can fix it for is 5 years. There are 10-year mortgages, but the rate is way higher. So the typical time period is 5 years. Yeah.
And that was interesting because as soon as he told me that, the wheels started turning. I'm like, okay, what would I do in these situations, right? But I would look at that if somebody just took out a 5-year loan and they've been paying on it for a year, you've got a window of about 3 years, not 4, but about 3 years to go and buy that property or control that property using a lease and using, for us in the United States, it's an option contract giving us the right to buy it at a future date for a predetermined amount of money. But if you can go and you find a distressed homeowner that's already distressed today, and you can take that property over, take its payments over, lease it, and then lease it out to tenants and cash flow it, it's a great model. We like to control property. We don't always buy it. So it's not uncommon for me to absolutely just lease it and put the option in place and put some work into it, fix it up some, and go and find a buyer for it. And ultimately, because I don't own it yet, the current owner will sell it direct to my buyer, and I get paid to facilitate it. I feel like you all have a lot of opportunity coming your way. From what I
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also just this moment of pivoting the way you do business, right? Because like real estate cycles, and this is what's so fascinating, is like real estate cycles are usually quite long. I mean, typically, historically, it's something like 19 years. So basically, we're working in an environment where nobody has seen a serious downturn, at least in Canada. We haven't seen a real crash. And so everybody's always been, our entire careers have been on this like kind of upward trajectory. And now it's like, okay, well, let's reevaluate what are the strategies when different things are happening. And I think as you say, it's time to start looking around, and maybe having American guests is going to become increasingly relevant.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
What is, just for my own curiosity, and tell me to shut up if we're over time, but what is your median average price points where you are, and how much have they gone up in the last few years?
Yeah. So with COVID, I mean, I think our markets, some of them almost doubled. Like the single family home markets went crazy. And I mean, we live in Montreal, which is more like New York. So it's a pretty dense city. And like, there's not that many single family homes. That's more like kind of a country thing. Investors here typically buy anywhere from like a duplex up to, I do more like multifamilies. And then obviously there's people who do like 50 unit things, right? And the investment properties also went up, but it was more of like a game with the multiples of revenue, because like properties get sold as a function of the multiples of revenue, and like with low interest rates that went up. And so it's kind of like not exactly the same game in multifamily as it is with single family, but I think for sure, like, and 30 to 40% of Canadian mortgages are variable rate, like homeowner mortgages. And so it means that like, if those people were stretched because the market was so high, like they're going to be very, very stretched, because they're now getting letters in the bank every month that says, no, your payment went up by $300. No, your payment went up by $400. No, your payment went up by $500. And so like, a lot of people are going to have to start unloading those things, because they're not going to be able to take the interest rate increases.
But how are they going to unload them when the property values are going to go down?
No, well, they're going to have to unload them at a discount, right? And like the thing is, because we capitalize, like we're more capitalized in our properties, the minimum down payment is 5%. And a conventional loan is 20%. So basically they're building in the fact that the market can drop 20%. And like, is it going to drop 20%? Well, I don't think it will drop that much, but like it could drop 20% and then people will just lose their down payments. And then the bank forecloses on the house and sells it for 80 cents on the dollar.
How long does the foreclosure process take where you are?
A while. I mean, they get like a 60-day notice and then it goes to the lawyers and then Like in Canada, I think 1 in 900 houses forecloses. In the US, it's 1 in 20.
Yeah.
So anyway.
You might see an increase in that though, Terrie. You might.
Sorry?
I hope you don't catch up to us, but you may.
Yeah.
You may definitely see it. Well, I would love for you to stay in touch with me too as that progresses, because curiosity for me, but any way I can help, I'd love to. And any of your listeners, anything that they want to reach out to me about, use the same email address as, getting on the book, Derek@bestreifunding.com. And as I said, anybody that wants to get out of the cold in February 2023, come to Cancun. We'd love to have you. I'm getting out of the cold. It's just as cold in Wisconsin as it is where you're at.
All right. Well, thank you, Derek, for spending this time with me. And we'll drop all your links in the show notes.
Thank you so much.